I've always been fascinated by money, how it moves, how it controls everything, and most of all, how it shapes power. So let me take you on a journey through the undercurrents of our modern world, starting with a rather uncomfortable truth. Every country on Earth is drowning in debt. Yes, even the richest ones. It's like a global game of Monopoly, but nobody's passing go or collecting a paycheck, just passing IOUs. Take the United States, for example. Right now, it owes over $38 trillion. That's more zeros than I can count without my glasses. The UK, my own backyard, isn't far behind, with a national debt sitting around $2.5 trillion. Japan's sitting on nearly $6.5 trillion, and even oil-rich places like Saudi Arabia carry massive debts. It's like everyone's got a tab open at the pub, but the barman is invisible. Now here's the kicker. If every country owes money, who exactly is getting paid? Who's the landlord collecting the rent? Turns out the whole world owes money to itself. Imagine a giant web where every strand is a promise, a bond, an IOU. And if you pull on one thread, the whole thing might unravel, or maybe just jiggle a bit, like a plate of jelly on a shaky table. But to really understand this mess, we need to rewind a few centuries. No, not to the days of Instagram or Bitcoin, but back to 1694, in England. Picture King William III pacing around his palace, worried because England is at war with France and running out of gold coins faster than a pub runs out of ale on a Friday night. The king had an idea. What if he borrowed money from merchants, promising to pay them back with interest later, funded by future taxes? It was revolutionary, like inventing the first credit card, but with way more drama. To manage this new financial magic trick, the Bank of England was born. Suddenly, the government could spend money it didn't have, and lenders got a promise they could trade or sell. This was the birth of government bonds, the great-grandparents of today's financial system. France copied the idea, the Netherlands perfected it, and the newly independent United States used it to fund its revolution and westward expansion. Debt became less about failure and more about trustworthiness. If you could borrow, you could rule. Fast forward to today, and debt isn't just a burden. It's the invisible scaffolding holding up the entire global economy. Countries owe trillions, banks lend trillions, and taxpayers everywhere are caught in the middle. But the real question still nags. Who holds the other end of this massive financial rope? Well, in the U.S., about half of the $38 trillion debt is publicly held, meaning investors like banks, pension funds, and even the Federal Reserve own it. The other half? It's just the government owing money to itself. It's a loop, a giant financial selfie. Japan, China, the UK, and several others hold chunks of U.S. debt, but none of them hold the reins entirely. The global system is like a poker game where everyone has borrowed chips from the next player, and the only rule is that nobody can fold. Central banks, the big financial wizards, are the real game masters, deciding who can borrow cheaply and who pays a premium just to stay alive. When confidence falters, economies crash, governments tumble, and the whole house of cards shudders. But here's the twist. Governments don't actually plan to pay off their debts. Nope. They roll it over like a never-ending subscription. Think Netflix, but for money. Interest payments are the real product, a kind of rent for staying in the game. If governments suddenly cleared their debts, the global economy would implode like a badly baked soufflé. So, politicians talking about balancing the budget or paying down debt, mostly smoke and mirrors. The goal isn't to erase debt, but to keep it sustainable and desirable enough that everyone keeps believing in it. Because once that belief cracks, the whole system could grind to a terrifying halt. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Debt isn't just a number or a balance sheet. It's a transfer of wealth from everyday folks like you and me up to the institutions and investors who hold the bonds. It's a system that rewards those who own debt and punishes those who pay it. Now imagine what happens when the engine that powers all this debt runs out of fuel, when borrowing can't keep pace with the promises made before. That's when the abstract becomes personal. That's when the question, who really owns the debt, stops being a puzzle and starts being a reality we all have to face. But the story doesn't end here. Behind the numbers, behind the bonds and the balance sheets, there's a mystery lurking, one that could change everything. And trust me, it's not just another economic theory. It's a secret that's been hiding in plain sight. So buckle up. The next chapter is going to shake the foundations even more. I remember the first time I really saw the weight of this debt game up close. It was in a quiet little town called Ashford, nestled somewhere in the English countryside. Not exactly the financial heart of the world, but the kind of place where you'd expect debts to be simple. A library fine here, a tab at the local pub there. Turns out debts here mirror the world, complex, tangled, and hiding secrets beneath the surface. One evening I met a woman named Emma Clark. She wasn't your typical financial guru. Instead, she was a sharp, elegant figure who seemed to carry the weight of the world in her eyes. Emma wore a deep, emerald green dress that hugged her figure just right, paired with sleek black stilettos that clicked purposefully on the wooden floor. A delicate silver necklace caught the dim light, drawing attention to the curve of her neck. There was something magnetic about her, like she knew more than she let on. Emma wasn't just charming, she was a bond trader. One of those people who decide which countries get to borrow money cheaply and which have to pay through the nose. She explained to me in a voice as smooth as her silk scarf that debt is less about numbers and more about trust. It's a dance, she said, between fear and hope. The markets watch every move governments make like hawks. If they smell weakness, they pounce. I joked, so it's like dating but with trillions of pounds? She laughed, the kind of laugh that's half amusement, half warning. Exactly, and just like in dating, one wrong move can break the deal, and that's when things get messy. Emma pulled out her phone and showed me the latest bond yields flashing on her screen, numbers that might as well have been ancient runes to me. A tiny spike here meant a country's borrowing costs were going up. Investors were losing faith. And when faith falters, governments scramble like kids trying to hide a broken vase. She told me about Greece's crisis in 2010. The government's debt had become a monster too big to feed. Bondholders panicked, yields shot up, and suddenly the whole European Union was scrambling to save the day. The rescue came with a heavy price: austerity. Taxes rose, public spending was slashed, and unemployment soared. Emma said it was like a financial punishment handed down to an entire generation for mistakes many didn't even make. I asked if Britain could face the same fate. Emma's eyes sharpened. Every country's on the edge, she said. It's just a matter of time before the next domino falls. The system is fragile. As we talked, the pub's warm glow seemed to fade a little. Outside, the night air hung heavy with the scent of rain. I realized that debt wasn't just a series of numbers on a spreadsheet. It was a living, breathing force, one that shaped lives, dreams, and disasters. Emma's parting words echoed in my mind. We trade promises, but promises can break. When that happens, the game changes. Walking back through the misty streets of Ashford, I felt the weight of those promises pressing down. And deep down, I knew the story was far from over. Somewhere in the heart of this debt maze was a secret, a vulnerability that could unravel everything. The question was, who held the key? The next morning, Ashford woke under a slate-gray sky, the kind that presses down on your chest and makes the air feel heavier. I found myself wandering toward the town's old library, a stone building with ivy crawling up its walls, quiet, unassuming, but full of stories. Not just books, but secrets buried in dusty ledgers and forgotten records. If debt was a living beast, then history was its skeleton. Inside, I met Peter Mason, the town historian, a lean man in his 60s, with wire-rimmed glasses perched on a long nose and a faded tweed jacket that smelled faintly of mothballs and old paper. Peter's eyes sparkled with mischief and knowledge, like he'd uncovered half the world's conspiracies, but still enjoyed a good puzzle. He ushered me to a corner where a thin volume lay open. "You want to understand debt," he said. "You have to start with trust, and trust starts with a story." Then he began to tell me about the birth of the modern financial system, right here in England, centuries ago. Back in 1694, when the Bank of England was first created, the country was on the brink of financial collapse. King William III needed funds to keep fighting France, but the treasury was empty. So, he turned to wealthy merchants and nobles, promising them a steady income from future taxes in exchange for loans. It was the first government bond, essentially the state borrowing money from its own people, creating a promise that could be bought and sold. Peter leaned in, lowering his voice like sharing a secret. That promise was revolutionary because it turned debt into an asset. Suddenly, money the government didn't have became real, tradable, and most importantly, trusted. He tapped the book. It was the seed that grew into the global economy we know today. I asked him if people back then understood what they were getting into. He chuckled. Not really. They were just hoping the king wouldn't default and their income would come through. It's funny. Debt started as a war strategy, yet now it's the backbone of peace and prosperity. But it's a double-edged sword. Peter's gaze drifted to the window, where the rain had started to fall in slow, steady sheets. Empires no longer conquer lands for gold, he said. They issue bonds to extract interest. The battlefield moved from fields to balance sheets, and the players, not just kings and merchants anymore, but entire nations, banks, and citizens. I thought about Emma's warning last night, that the system was fragile, a delicate dance of trust and fear. Peter confirmed it. "If confidence breaks," he said softly, "the whole structure collapses. It's like a game of Jenga. One wrong move, and the tower falls." Before I left, Peter handed me a dog-eared printout, a chart tracing national debts from England's early days to now. The numbers ballooned, climbing higher and higher, faster than any mountain I'd ever seen. "Debt isn't about failure," he said. "It's about power. The ability to borrow is the ability to govern." Outside, the rain blurred the streets of Ashford, washing away footprints, but not the stories they carried. I tucked Peter's words and that fragile chart deep in my pocket, feeling the weight of history pressing into the present. And in the silence of that rainy morning, I realized the debt story wasn't just about money or nations. It was about trust, control, and the invisible chains binding us all. Chains that might snap when we least expect it. That afternoon, I found myself back in London, but not in the usual bustling heart of the city. Instead, I headed to a sleek office tower in Canary Wharf, where the real power often hides behind glass walls and polished floors. This was where the game of debt truly played out. Not in dusty archives, but in whispered deals and flashing screens. Inside, I met Daniel Brooks, a man whose presence filled the room like a storm about to break. Tall, sharply dressed in a navy suit, tailored to perfection, his crisp white shirt contrasted with a burgundy silk tie that hinted at confidence bordering on arrogance. His polished black shoes tapped impatiently as he paced, a Rolex glinting on his wrist like a tiny spotlight. Daniel was a hedge fund manager, one of the shadowy figures who decide which countries get cheap loans and which pay through the nose. Debt, he said, is the ultimate weapon, and the ultimate weapon is confidence. His voice was smooth, but with an edge that warned me this wasn't a conversation for the faint-hearted. He pulled up a graph on his tablet, showing bond yields from various countries. See this spike? That's when investors lose faith. Suddenly, borrowing costs soar, and governments scramble to keep the lights on. It's like watching a high-stakes poker game where the stakes are entire economies. I asked him if he ever felt responsible for the chaos this could cause. He smirked. Responsibility? No. Opportunity? Always. When a country falters, that's when we make our move. It's survival of the fittest. You either adapt or get eaten alive. Daniel's office overlooked the Thames, the river winding through the city like a silver snake. Outside, cranes loomed over construction sites, symbols of constant growth and rebuilding. But inside, Daniel painted a darker picture. Debt isn't just about money, it's about control. Those who hold the bonds hold the power to shape governments, economies, even lives. He told me about the invisible web connecting governments, banks, pension funds, and central banks, a global network of promises and obligations. It's a planetary game of hot potato, he said, except the potato is made of promises. I noticed a framed photo on his desk, a glamorous woman in a sleek black dress, her red lips curved in a knowing smile. "Who's this?" I asked. "Ah, that's Charlotte," he said, a rare softness entering his voice. "She's my secret weapon. In this game, alliances aren't just financial, they're personal. Charm, influence, and timing can be worth more than millions." Daniel leaned back, swirling a glass of scotch. "The system works because nobody wants to call it out. Everyone's in on the game, playing their part, but when confidence cracks, things get ugly. Remember Greece, Argentina, Sri Lanka? When the music stops, the chairs disappear." I realized then that behind every bond, every number, there were people like Daniel, players who thrived in the shadows, shaping destinies with a flick of their pen or a whispered phone call. And like any game, there were winners and losers. As I left, Daniel's final words lingered. Debt isn't a burden, it's the world's currency, and currencies, like power, can vanish in a heartbeat. Outside, the London fog wrapped the city in a cold embrace. Somewhere beyond the mist, the debt game was still being played. High stakes, no mercy, and the next move anyone's guess. The next morning I found myself in a very different setting, a sprawling housing estate on the outskirts of Manchester, where the hum of factories once filled the air, and now silence lingered like a stubborn stain. Here, debt wasn't just a number on a screen or a game played in glossy offices. It was the weight on people's shoulders, the invisible chain tightening around everyday lives. I met Sarah Turner, a single mother of two, standing outside her modest brick home. She wore a faded denim jacket over a soft floral dress, and her worn leather boots had seen better days. Despite the tired lines on her face, her eyes held a fierce determination. Around her neck hung a simple pendant, a tiny silver heart, catching the weak morning light. Sarah told me how debt had crept into her life like a silent thief. Job cuts had shrunk the local economy, and with rising bills and stagnant wages, credit cards and loans became lifelines. "It's like trying to fill a bucket with holes," she said, her voice steady but edged with exhaustion. "You borrow to pay bills, then borrow again to pay the first loan. It never ends." Her story wasn't unique, but it was painfully real. The national debt, the global markets, they felt distant, abstract. But here, in this quiet suburb, debt was a daily struggle, a constant balancing act between survival and despair. Sarah spoke about the taxes she paid, the squeezed public services, and the pensions that seemed like a distant dream. "We're the ones footing the bill," she said. But the money flows up to the banks, the investors, the big funds. It's like the system's rigged. She showed me her worn-out bank statements, the letters demanding payments, the threatening phone calls. "I'm not a villain or a victim," she said, "just caught in the middle. The debt system doesn't care about people like me. It only cares about numbers." As we talked, her children played nearby, their laughter a fragile bubble against the harsh reality. Sarah's dress fluttered in the chilly wind, the soft fabric a stark contrast to the hard edges of her world. Her story made me realize that debt wasn't just an economic concept. It was a social fault line, dividing those who owned debt and those who paid for it. The promises made in distant boardrooms echoed here in homes like Sarah's, shaping destinies in ways unseen. Before I left, Sarah looked me in the eye and said, "If this keeps up, something's got to give. The whole system can't last forever." Walking away, I felt the weight of her words pressing down. Behind the staggering numbers of national debts and global markets were real people, struggling, hoping, trapped. And somewhere in this vast, tangled web of promises and power, the fault lines were deepening. The question wasn't just who owed what, but who would break first, and when that happened, no one would be left untouched. A few days later, I found myself on the misty shores of Edinburgh, where the cold North Sea winds swept through narrow cobbled streets, and ancient stone buildings whispered stories of empires long past. It was here I met James Whittaker, a reserved man in his early 40s, with salt-and-pepper hair and eyes that held a quiet intensity. He wore a tailored charcoal coat over a crisp white shirt, the collar just peeking out, and polished brown brogues that tapped softly as he walked with purpose. James was a central banker, the kind of person whose decisions ripple quietly but powerfully through the global economy. He invited me into a sleek, understated office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city's spires and the distant sea. On his desk lay a neat stack of documents next to a worn, leather-bound journal. "Debt," James said, leaning back in his chair, "isn't just about numbers or markets. It's about confidence. Confidence that governments will honor their promises, that currencies will hold value, that economies will keep turning." He explained how central banks like the Bank of England and the Federal Reserve don't just watch debt. They create it. When they buy government bonds, they inject new money into the system, expanding the money supply. It's a delicate balance, he warned. Too much, and inflation spirals out of control. Too little, and economies stall. We're like tightrope walkers, balancing between growth and collapse. James spoke of the invisible dance between governments, markets, and central banks. A choreography held together by faith in the future. "But what happens when that faith breaks?" I asked. He sighed. "Then we see crises, the sudden spikes in borrowing costs, currency crashes, political upheavals. Markets turn from partners to predators." I noticed a framed photograph on his shelf, a woman in a deep red dress, her gaze steady and fierce. "Who's this?" I inquired. "That's my wife, Eleanor," James said with a soft smile. "She's a historian. She reminds me that behind every economic model, there's a human story." We spoke about Greece's debt crisis, Argentina's defaults, and the recent turmoil in emerging markets. James explained how, despite the severity, debt is rarely paid off. Governments roll it over, refinancing old loans with new ones. "It's a perpetual cycle," he said. "Debt isn't meant to be extinguished. It's meant to be managed." As the sun dipped behind the city's skyline, casting long shadows, James's words lingered in the room. Debt was not a problem to solve, but a condition to live with. An unending negotiation between promise and reality. Walking back into the chill evening, I felt the weight of that truth pressing in. The global financial system was a house built on promises, balanced precariously on trust. And when that trust faltered, the fragile dance would end in disaster. But what if the next collapse wasn't just about money? What if something deeper, more insidious, was lurking beneath the surface, waiting to tip the scales? The thought sent a shiver down my spine as the Edinburgh fog swallowed the city whole. Late one evening, I found myself wandering through the narrow, lantern-lit streets of Cambridge, far from the financial bustle but close to the birthplace of many groundbreaking ideas. It was here I met Olivia Bennet, a brilliant economist known for her razor-sharp mind and unconventional views. Olivia was the kind of woman who could make complex theories feel like thrilling mysteries. That night, she wore a sleek navy sheath dress that hugged her curves elegantly, paired with deep burgundy heels that clicked softly on the cobblestones. A silver bracelet wrapped delicately around her wrist, catching the dim light with every gesture she made. There was an undeniable grace in how she carried herself, a subtle allure that made every word she spoke linger a little longer. Over coffee in a quiet cafe, Olivia leaned in, her voice low but intense. Debt isn't just about governments or markets. It's about narratives, stories we tell ourselves about value, risk, and trust. Without those stories, the system collapses. She explained how markets are driven not just by facts, but by psychology, by belief and fear, hope and doubt. It's like a vast theater, she said, where everyone plays a role, from politicians to pensioners, and the script is written in numbers. Olivia pulled out a tablet and showed me graphs depicting the endless growth of global debt, over 315 trillion and climbing. But here's the paradox, she said. The more debt grows, the more fragile the system becomes. It's like building a tower of cards, taller and taller, daring gravity to intervene. I asked her about the role of international institutions, the IMF, the World Bank. She smiled wryly. They're the referees and sometimes the villains. When countries falter, they step in with loans, conditions, and austerity. But it's a delicate dance. Too much intervention can spark unrest. Too little, and chaos ensues. We talked about how debt perpetuates inequality, funneling wealth upward while the masses bear the burden. It's a transfer of power disguised as economic policy, Olivia said. And it's not new. It's just scaled up. Her eyes sparkled with a mixture of excitement and warning. The system depends on faith in endless growth and refinancing. But what if that faith breaks? What if the narratives unravel? As we parted, Olivia's last words echoed in my mind. Debt is a story we all live by, but every story has an ending. The question is, what comes next? Walking back through the foggy streets, I realized that debt was more than numbers or history. It was a living story, a fragile, shifting illusion that held the world together. And somewhere, hidden in the script, was a secret, waiting to rewrite everything. A few nights later, under a pale moon in the heart of Bristol, I met Thomas Reed, a weathered yet sharp-witted journalist who had spent years chasing stories no one dared to tell. He was a man whose salt-and-pepper hair framed a face etched with lines from late nights and too much coffee. That evening, Thomas wore a worn leather jacket over a slightly rumpled shirt, the kind of look that suggested he'd been up all night, chasing leads. His eyes, sharp and restless, held the kind of knowing that only comes from peeling back layers others preferred to keep hidden. We sat in a dimly lit pub, the air thick with the scent of oak and spilled ale. Thomas leaned in, voice low and conspiratorial. Debt isn't just a financial tool, he said. It's a leash, a way to control nations and people without firing a single shot. He told me stories of how powerful institutions, the IMF, credit rating agencies, and secretive bondholders had the power to dictate terms to entire countries. When a government falters, he explained, it's not just about money. It's about sovereignty. The strings get pulled, decisions made in boardrooms thousands of miles away, impacting millions. Thomas spoke of backroom deals, of nations forced into austerity measures that sparked protests, sometimes even revolutions. The debt cycle is a trap, he said. Old loans get replaced by new ones, but the conditions tighten. People pay, but the powerful gain. I asked if there was any escape. Thomas let out a bitter laugh. Escape? Not really. The system's designed to keep the game going, but every now and then cracks appear. Greece, Argentina, Sri Lanka. They're warnings, signs the machine can falter. He pulled a crumpled newspaper clipping from his pocket, a headline screaming about a mysterious financial consortium quietly buying up sovereign bonds. There are players even the markets don't see, he whispered. Hidden hands moving billions, shaping futures in shadows. The pub's warm light flickered as a sudden gust rattled the windows. Thomas's gaze darkened. Debt is power disguised as promise, but promises can break, and when they do, the fallout isn't just economic, it's personal, violent, unpredictable. As we parted that night, I felt the weight of Thomas's words settle like a storm cloud. Debt was no mere number. It was a weapon, a cage, and a game played in shadows. And somewhere in those shadows, a secret was waiting, one that could shatter the fragile peace the world clings to. Walking into the cold night, I couldn't shake the feeling that the next move in this deadly game was already being made. And no one knew who would be left standing when the dust settled. A week later, I found myself in the bustling streets of Oxford, where centuries of tradition and knowledge blended with the restless energy of a modern city. Amid the historic stone buildings and the chatter of students, I sought out Dr. Evelyn Carter, a rising star in the world of political economics. She was known for her sharp intellect and fearless insights, and when I met her, she was dressed in a fitted charcoal blazer over a silk cream blouse, her auburn hair pinned back to reveal a strong jawline and piercing green eyes that seemed to see right through you. We sat in a quiet corner of a university cafe, away from the buzz, as Evelyn laid out a stark truth. Debt isn't just an economic tool, it's a political weapon. It shapes who holds power and who's left powerless. She explained how governments use debt strategically, not to repay it, but to maintain influence, both domestically and internationally. National debt, she said, is a mask for control. It keeps countries tied to global systems that dictate policy, often overriding democratic will. Evelyn spoke about the debt trap diplomacy some powerful nations employ, lending money to smaller countries with conditions that effectively hand over key assets or influence. It's not just numbers on a ledger, it's leverage, a way to reshape the world map without firing a shot. Her voice grew intense as she described how this system perpetuates inequality, with wealth and power concentrated at the top, while ordinary citizens bear the burden. Debt flows upward, she said. Interest payments become a transfer from the many to the few. I asked if there was hope for change. Evelyn's eyes flashed. Change requires awareness and courage, but the system is built to resist. Debt isn't broken. It's designed to work this way. As we talked, I noticed a small, ornate key on her necklace, glinting in the soft light. What's that? I asked. Evelyn smiled enigmatically. A reminder that every system has its locks, and maybe its keys. Leaving the cafe, I felt the weight of her words pressing down. Debt was more than money owed. It was a battlefield of power and control, a hidden war fought in boardrooms and parliaments. And somewhere beneath it all, a secret waited, one that could unlock the future or plunge us deeper into the cycle. As night fell over Oxford's ancient spires, I realized the pieces were coming together. But the final move, the one that would shake the world's foundations, was still out there, waiting to be played. The night was thick with fog when I arrived in the quiet village of Rye, nestled along England's southern coast. The sea breeze carried whispers of old secrets and forgotten battles, and the narrow streets were lined with weathered cottages, bathed in the soft glow of antique street lamps. It was here, in a dimly lit study filled with leather-bound books and the scent of aged oak, that I met Professor Henry Langley, a man whose reputation for unraveling financial mysteries was as legendary as the antiquity of his surroundings. Henry was tall and lean, his silver hair swept back with an air of scholarly elegance. His deep blue eyes sparkled behind round spectacles, and his dark tweed jacket was adorned with subtle patches at the elbows, a nod to a lifetime spent poring over history's tangled webs. As he poured 2 glasses of whiskey, the amber liquid caught the flickering light, casting shadows that danced like the secrets he was about to reveal. "Debt," Henry began, his voice steady but layered with gravity, "is not merely a ledger of numbers. It is a living, breathing force, a complex web spun over centuries, binding nations, institutions, and individuals alike." He spoke of the intricate dance between governments issuing bonds, central banks creating money, and investors fueling the cycle with endless faith. The system is built on promises traded, bought, and sold, but promises, like glass, can shatter. Henry's gaze intensified. Behind the scenes, a hidden network of players, hedge funds, sovereign wealth funds, shadowy consortia, wield power beyond governments. They decide who thrives and who collapses. I asked about the possibility of the system's collapse. He smiled thinly. Collapse is always a threat, but the true danger lies in the unknown. There are forces at work, quietly shaping the future. Algorithms, high-frequency traders, even political agendas that could tip the balance without warning. Then, leaning forward, Henry shared a chilling thought. Imagine a day when confidence breaks. Not gradually, but suddenly. When the largest holders of debt refuse to renew their promises, the dominoes would fall faster than anyone can react. He paused, eyes locking with mine. And in that moment the world will confront a truth long buried. Debt is a promise that can never be fully kept. As the clock chimed midnight, a distant thunder rolled across the sea, echoing the storm that lurked beneath the surface of global finance. Henry handed me a worn envelope, sealed with a crimson wax stamp. "Inside," he said, "lies a clue, something that could change everything you thought you knew about the debt we owe, and to whom." Stepping out into the foggy night, the envelope heavy in my coat pocket, I realized this was just the beginning. The delicate balance was unraveling, and the next chapter promised revelations that could shake the world to its core. The question now was, who would hold the power when the promises finally broke?